People who have heard deathbed confessions, what were some interesting ones? My dad had Alzheimer's and ended up in a secure ward. He was blind and almost deaf. I was visiting him one day. He didn't know who I was, but he started talking about me. He said I had done better than him in life and that he was proud of me. He was a quiet man and never told me that when I was growing up. Looking back, he did things that my dumbass never realized were for me. Like, when he retired, his colleagues asked what he'd like as a present. He chose a scientific calculator. This was back in the 1970s. He had no use for it. He gave it to me for university. I thought he was just passing it on, not realizing that he'd asked for it with me in mind. It wasn't a deathbed confession, but I cared for an elderly neighbor who had Alzheimer's, and sometimes she seemed to want to unburden herself of secrets. In the months before she went into a nursing home, I heard a lot about very minor transgressions at work, feuds with other ladies at church, and some cousin fucking. My grandma confessed to murder on her deathbed. Usually you'd think it was the pain relief, but she was such an eccentric it was actually believable. We traced all her ex-husbands, partners and any other likely candidates, and fortunately no one was missing or died an untimely death, but sometimes I wonder. My grandfather admitted to me, and only me, that he accidentally had sex with a man. My grandma suffered from dementia for many years before she passed. It got so bad she didn't remember who her family were and would barricade herself in her home because she was scared of everyone. She even forgot she smoked and would find her cigarettes months later after forgetting where they were and claim she was desperate for one. She'd put them away after one and that would be her again for months. The only memory she had left at the end was that her sister used to be able to play the piano beautifully and her husband, her childhood sweetheart, was gone, but she didn't know where. He died sometime earlier. She spent her days waiting for him to come home from wherever he was. "My John will be home soon," she would say, or someone would walk past the window and she'd double take and say thought that was my John. It was heartbreaking watching her deteriorate until she was on her deathbed, unaware of anything or anyone. I went to say my goodbyes to her in the hospital, and she held my hand and told me how much she loved me, but how she was ready to go, be with John now. In that moment, she remembered who I was, what was happening to her, and that her husband, my granddad, had gone already. She went in her sleep not long after that, and I'm forever thankful I managed to say goodbye and tell her how much I loved her too. I've held on to that moment for so long without really digesting it in any way that writing this just tore my heart out. I miss them both so much, but I know they're finally together again somewhere. I don't know if this counts as a confession, but it felt like one. My grandparents have 3 daughters. Everyone always said that my mom was my grandfather's secret favorite. He never agreed. I heard he was on his deathbed on April 6th. Went to see him on April 8th. He was scary looking, and the doctor kept saying he didn't understand why he wasn't dead yet. April 9th, everyone but my mom had the chance to come and say goodbye. She doesn't drive and my dad works 10 hours away. My grandpa kept saying her name, well, saying he couldn't eat or drink, so it was more like a whisper. My mom came by on the 10th. He looked at her, smiled, whispered my Amy. He closed his eyes and never opened them again. This isn't a confession, but I just wanted to share the last thing my grandfather said to me before he passed away due to lung cancer. I was about to go to Rome for a school trip, and my family told me to go to set my mind on something else for a few days. Before I left, I wanted to say goodbye as it was possibly the last time I could talk to him. He told me, "Have fun, boy, I'll see you next week." I went to Rome, and when I came back, he was already in a deep sleep due to medication. He wanted to peacefully pass away while sleeping. I came back the next week, and he was sleeping when I went to visit him. I told him everything I did in Rome, even though I knew he wouldn't wake up. The next morning he passed away. My grandmother said to me, "He waited for you, I still miss him so much." When I was in hospital, the guy in the bed next to me just asked to stop taking his meds as he was ready to die. Last thing I heard him say was, "There's no one waiting for me at home, so I'm going where they are." Wasn't really a shocking confession, just a lonely and heartbreaking one. I didn't see it, but my aunt watched her elderly mother fall down the stairs and confessed just before she died that she wasn't her biological mother. She told my aunt that her oldest sister was actually her mother. The sister had gotten pregnant too young and the mom said it was hers. A common way of handling it back then. She revealed it in her very last breath. Not a deathbed confession, but the last conversation I had with my grandfather has always stuck with me. He had Parkinson's and lived on a farm outside of town. One day he looked at me and said, "I'm getting too old to take care of mom, my grandmother. I need you to do that for me, okay?" His health deteriorated pretty rapidly from that point onward. I still call my grandmother every single day and try to get back home whenever I can to help out around the farm. Not exactly on his deathbed. My stepfather emailed me the night he passed away. In general, he was always in pain from chemo, cancer, meds and whatnot. He did not want to continue spending money as he wasted away. He asked me to never tell the rest of the family, but I'm taking all my sleeping pills tonight after your mom goes to bed. With luck, she'll never know the truth. It would break her. I'm a medical student, and I had a female patient who was new to our practice who was HIV positive. I needed to ask her how she got the virus. I point sexual or fourth drugs. She tells me it was sexually transmitted, and the only reason she got tested was because her partner of 3 years last words to her as he was dying in hospice was, I'm sorry, I wanted to tell you, forgive me." Heavy stuff. My dad was adopted from a woman who went to my grandparents' church and got pregnant out of wedlock. My grandpa confessed on his deathbed that he had actually had an affair with that woman, and he was my dad's real father, which was why he suggested adopting him in the first place. I was told by my father that in addition to 2 other kids he had, that I knew of, there were more children of his out there. Also that only 2 of his kids were with the same woman. 4 of them showed up at his service, in addition to the other 2, making it 7 of us present. We also found out that he may have had other kids elsewhere, but my family kept really poor records of things, so I have never found out who they are. Most of that was word of mouth from old friends of his. Weird note, but all of us got together and now stay in contact. We had a good amount in common, and see each other when we can. I had an old uncle who refused to die until his lifelong mistress came to see him. When he was in a new country, and met an amazing woman. But when he went home to visit, an arranged marriage was set for him, and his father was ill, so he ended up staying and having kids. He later immigrated back with his new family, and found his old love had never moved on. He never stopped loving her either. They got back together. Both women knew of each other but never met. His kids called her auntie, and knew of her, but never met her. On his deathbed he kept on fighting to live. His son asked him, "Do you want to see auntie?" His eyes grew as he tried to communicate yes. The son called auntie to let her know he was dying. She said she knew, and was waiting in her car out in the parking lot. Auntie came to see him, and within 5 minutes he passed away in her arms. My mother died when I was 11 of stage 4 cancer. While she was on hospice at home, my grandmother, on my dad's side, was standing by the bed. She woke up, heavily medicated, pointed and said, "What are you doing here?" I never liked, not especially shocking but hilarious. It sounds heartless, but my grandmother gave my mom hell when she was alive. My other grandmother, mom's mom, tried to hold in laughter as she told her she taught her better than that. As my mother lay in her hospice bed dying of cancer, she beckoned me closer to her and said, I've hidden the money in the..." She was having trouble speaking and getting breath and her voice was cracking. She tried one last time, "The money's in the..." She closed her eyes, her breath stopped, and her head slumped to one side. A few seconds later she burst out laughing. She was pranking me. She died 3 days later. My grandpa told my dad he loved him for the first time when he was dying from cancer. Grandpa was a drunk all throughout my dad's childhood and had a strained relationship with the family. So this was pretty surprising to hear from him. My mom told me about the death of her father, my grandfather, and his last words to her. She said he was on his deathbed, and it was obvious. He was nearing the end. He motioned her over to tell her something. She went over, leaned in close, expecting some declaration of his love for her, or some deeply insightful. He said the good family silverware is hidden in the ventilation system about 15 feet out from the furnace. She looked at him, like he was crazy. He said, "What? We travel a lot and that's where I hid it. That shit's expensive." He died the next morning. My mom's aunt, when she was dying, revealed she'd had the hots for my dad for years. He claimed to be mad he never married her after divorcing my mom, since she had some money to her name. I had a hospice patient who asked everybody, "Is it December 13th? Since mid-November she had been asking this. We'd hear this question multiple times every day and just assumed it was a family member's birthday or something. December 13th finally rolls around, and that's the day she dies. Well, it was intended to be a deathbed confession, but she pulled through. My GF's mom told my GF her birth father's name, after saying she didn't know, she was whoring around and couldn't remember. It was Orange County in the 80s and apparently my future mother-in-law fucked Ann. Did drugs with most of the lowlifes in Southern California. But she did know who my GF's dad was, and finally told her after 30 plus years. Turns out he now lived less than 3 blocks away in our small town in the Mojave Desert. His kids look exactly like my GF did at their age. We didn't make contact, as his criminal record is a mile long, and he's a shitty person by all evidence.